Hey guys, we are now less than 20 days away from the midterm elections, so today we're going to be taking a look at where each of the governor elections are according to the latest polls, which party is leading in the 36 races that we have across the country. We essentially have polls from every single election at this point in time, and so we'll start off with Oregon and move across from the west to the east. And so we're just going to get right into it. We have a lot of races to cover. So starting off in Oregon, Tina Kotek is right now losing against Christine Drazan in the latest polls. Drazan currently leads by 2.7% with Betsy Johnson in third place. Now I do think that Kotek still has a very good chance at winning as the Democrat in this solid blue state. However, the Democratic Party really isn't doing that great in the state of Oregon in terms of how it's governing, because Kay Brown was barely reelected in 2018 in this solid blue state, despite 2018 being a very good year for Democrats. And so this year, Tina Kotek really is struggling against Drazan, but she is still very much in the race, despite Drazan currently being up by a lean margin in the polls. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens in the next couple of weeks, but I think that this race at this point is almost a pure toss-up. The 530 forecast has it as a toss-up, but gives Christine Drazan the slight advantage, with her having a 54% chance at winning. In California, Gavin Newsom leads by a solid margin against Brian Dale, 22.8%. Newsom survived a recall effort just last year and is currently on track to easily winning a second term. He won by a solid margin in 2018, defeating Dan Cox by 24 points. I think he'll win by a slightly smaller margin, but it's really not going to be too different. Gavin Newsom is a potential candidate for the 2024 Democratic nomination if Joe Biden does not run for re-election, and maybe even a potential nominee for vice president, as Kamala Harris really isn't doing very well in her position at all. But right now, Gavin Newsom is on track to winning at least his governor race, with him probably going to win by at least 20 points. And so now moving on to Idaho and Wyoming, we don't have polls for these two elections, but they are going to be very solid for the GOP nonetheless. The incoming governors here are going to win their second terms. Next up in Nevada, we have one of the four main governor elections of the year, the other three being Arizona, Kansas, and Wisconsin. These four races are going to be the closest ones, and so the first one we have is, of course, the Silver State of Nevada, where Steve Sisolak is running against Joe Lombardo. This race is pretty much a pure toss-up at this point, even though Lombardo has taken a very slight lead in the polling very recently. In 2018, polls underestimated Democratic support. Steve Sisolak was losing in many of the final polls against Adam Laxalt, but he ended up winning by 4%, and in the Senate race as well, Dean Heller was expected to win re-election according to many of the final surveys against Jackie Rosen, but Jackie Rosen ended up winning by 5%. And so yes, Nevada voted pretty blue in 2018, but 2022 is just a completely different year, and Sisolak really is struggling to win. However, this race is still a toss-up. He still does have a very good chance. 538 currently gives him a 55% chance at winning, but according to the polls alone, right now Steve Sisolak is up by a tilt margin. And now we have the second of the four ultra-competitive elections. That, of course, is the race in Arizona, with Kari Lake running against Katie Hobbs to succeed Doug Ducey, who was easily reelected in 2018. And so Kari Lake really looked like she was going to lose this race for quite a while, right after she won the Republican nomination. Katie Hobbs was ahead pretty significantly towards the middle of the month of September, but now she has lost her lead, and Kari Lake is the preferred candidate according to the latest polls. Trafalgar has her up by 3. This basically means the race is going to be very, very close. I think the Arizona election is going to go down to the wire. Kari Lake is not a good nominee. Katie Hobbs isn't too great either. I mean, she's saying that she doesn't want to debate Kari Lake because Kari Lake just lies all the time, which there is some merit to that, but it's not going to look good if you're refusing to debate your opponent for really any reason. And so that's why Kari Lake, I think, is doing so well recently. She's really driving home the point that Katie Hobbs does not want to debate her, and so that's why she currently is leading in the polls. And so it's just like Nevada, Arizona is going to be a tilt Republican state, but this race could still go both ways. Democrats could definitely turn this around. Katie Hobbs is still, just like Steve Sisolak in Nevada, she's still very much in this election. 538 currently gives Lake a 55% chance at winning, so it's still in that pure toss-up category. In Colorado, Jared Polis was elected in 2018 by a double-digit margin. He's going to win re-election this year pretty easily. The race really isn't going to be too close. He's currently up by 15.9% in the polls against Heidi Gonnell. Every single poll has shown him winning his re-election by double-digit margin, and so Colorado is, of course, going to be solid blue. Next up, in New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, I've said, really is not the best candidate for governor. She is the incumbent, though. She did win by 14 points in 2018, but since then, she's become a very unpopular governor, and that's why she was initially struggling against Mark Ranchetti for quite a while, but now her lead has expanded to 9.1%. She's doing much better than before, and so now I do have full confidence that she's going to win re-election. New Mexico currently is a likely Democratic state, according to the latest polls. And now we're going to move on to the 5 races in the middle of the country. We have polls from every single one of these elections, and the polling, I think, is really going to be very surprising, especially in these first 4 at the top above Texas. So starting off with South Dakota, Kristi Noem is only up by 4% in the polls. This race is still going to be solid Republican, with Jamie Smith only having a 1% chance at winning, but Kristi Noem up by 4%, that's a pretty small margin, and it's really not too unrealistic, because in 2018, she only won her first term by 3.4% against Billy Sutton, and so right now, just like in 2018, South Dakota is going to be a lean Republican state. Meanwhile, in Nebraska, Jim Pillen is only by 7 points right now against his Democratic opponent, and this was a Republican-funded poll. Pillen is not the incumbent. The incumbent is retiring after this term, and so Pillen up by 7 is only going to make Nebraska a likely Republican state, still not where the GOP wants to be. And then in Kansas, this is the third out of the 4 big races. The only one left is Wisconsin. But in Kansas, Laura Kelly, who was elected by 5 points in 2018 against Chris Kobach, is now running for re-election, and she's actually up by 3.7% according to the latest polls. Even Emerson College has Laura Kelly up by 2 points. This really is a pretty big deal. Laura Kelly up by 2, according to Emerson College, a pollster that really doesn't favor Democrats in any way. Most of the time, their polls align pretty well with the Trafalgar Group's polls, and so Emerson College having Kelly up by 2, I think, is a pretty strong sign that she has a very good chance at winning her re-election. That's by 538, currently gives Laura Kelly a 63% chance at defeating Derek Schmidt, her Republican challenger. So right now, the state of Kansas is going to be lean Democratic, despite the year being 2022. Again, a horrible year for Democrats, and then her running in one of the most Republican states in the country. Laura Kelly is a popular governor and has a very good chance at winning re-election. However, in Oklahoma, we're seeing a governor really struggling, even more than Laura Kelly is in Kansas, and that is Kevin Stitt. And in Oklahoma, he's only ahead by 1 point in the polls now. I mean, just look at where he was at the beginning of September. Stitt plus 14, now it's only Stitt plus 1. It's basically a tilt margin, as Joy Hoffmeister has led in all 3 of the most recent polls. It is not impossible for Hoffmeister to win. She is a Democrat, but she's a very conservative Democrat, and somebody who, until last year, was a member of the Republican Party. And Oklahoma, even though it's a very red state, especially on the presidential level, Kevin Stitt barely won his first term in 2018 by just 12 points. This was a very weak margin in a state as red as Oklahoma, and in 2022, I think the race is going to be close. I do still believe Kevin Stitt is going to win, but Joy Hoffmeister is definitely giving him a run for his money, and according to the polls right now, Oklahoma is only going to be a tilt Republican state. And then in Texas, we have the election between Beto O'Rourke and Greg Abbott, but right now, Greg Abbott is still doing pretty well. Democrats may flip Texas in the near future in other elections, especially in a presidential election in the future. I do think they will be able to flip the Lone Star State, but on the gubernatorial level, Greg Abbott is still doing relatively well as he attempts to win a 3rd term in office. Beto O'Rourke, the best nominee Democrats could have chosen, but still, he is not good enough. Texas is just not going to flip in a year like 2022, and that's why it's currently a likely Republican state. And then in Alaska, Mike Dunleavy is going to be the first governor of the state to win re-election in over 2 decades. I mean, we saw Sarah Palin, Sean Parnell, Bill Walker all not win their re-elections or just not even run. Of course, Sarah Palin ended up resigning, but in Alaska this year, Mike Dunleavy is running for re-election, and he is going to win a 2nd term. Currently against Les Gara, he's up by 12.5%, and so that will make Alaska likely Republican just like Texas. And then we don't have polls from Hawaii, but of course, it's going to be very, very solid, with Josh Green currently expected to become the next governor of the Aloha State. And so now we have all the races on the western half of the U.S. done, and so we're going to move on to the Midwest and New England. So starting off in Minnesota, Democrats are in a very good position here, with Tim Walz on track to winning by almost a double-digit margin. He won by 11 points against Jeff Johnson back in 2018, and he's easily going to win a second term this year. Minnesota is almost solid for the Democratic Party. According to the 530 forecast, Tim Walz has a 94% chance at winning. And then in Iowa, Kim Reynolds up by 16. She might have only won by 3 points in 2018 against Mike Hubbell. This year, she's going to destroy Dedru DeGier, and she's currently expected to win by over 16%. And now we have the fourth out of the four most competitive governor races this year, and that, of course, is the election in Wisconsin. This is the race between Tony Evers and Tim Michels. I think both parties have a very good chance at winning. Tony Evers is only up by 0.4% in the polls, down the smallest margin he has really ever had. This election is going to be very, very close, as Democrats typically don't win in Wisconsin if they have their own president in the White House. If Trump was in the White House, Tony Evers would easily win re-election. He defeated the incumbent Scott Walker in 2018 by 1%. As a two-time incumbent, Scott Walker was running for a third term, and this was a very impressive win for Democrats, but this year it will be very difficult for them to hold on to it, as both parties have, I believe, an equally good chance at winning. Currently, though, we do see that Tony Evers is up by a tilt margin in the polls, and when looking at the 530 forecast, he has a slight advantage, 56% chance that the incumbent wins. Next up in Illinois, the race is going to be solid for Democrats, as J.B. Pritzker is up by 14 points, but technically the margin is going to be likely, as it's just under 15, but Darren Bailey does not stand a chance. J.B. Pritzker, who was elected by a solid margin in 2018, is going to win re-election very, very easily. The margin, though, I think is probably going to be around 13 to 14%. And then in the Wolverine state of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer is also on track to easily winning. I think she might win by 6 to 7 points. It's going to be less than her 8-point margin right now against Tudor Dixon, according to the polling average, but she really is doing very, very well. She is going to win her re-election. There's no doubt about that. Tudor Dixon stands no chance. For a long time, it looked like Whitmer was pretty vulnerable, but after James Craig was disqualified, Whitmer has been on a very smooth path to victory, to a second term. She won by almost double digits, 9 points in 2018, and so she is one of the strongest Democratic governors running this year. And then in Ohio, just like in Iowa, even though Mike DeWine barely won in 2018, only a 4-point margin, he's going to win this year by a very solid margin. He's up by 19 points, and his numbers have gone up pretty significantly in just the last 2 weeks. So Ohio, on the gubernatorial level, is going to be solid red, while the Senate race here is going to be very, very close. And then the final Rust Belt state that we have is Pennsylvania. This is the race between Josh Shapiro and Doug Mastriano. Even though the Senate race in the Keystone State is tightening, the same polls have Josh Shapiro ahead by double digits against Doug Mastriano. Mastriano is one of the worst Republican nominees this year, and I do think that Shapiro is going to win by a likely margin. Tom Wolf was reelected as the Democratic incumbent in 2018 by over 18 points last time in 2018, so the race is not going to be that good for Republicans. I think Democrats are going to easily win here, with Josh Shapiro elected the next governor of Pennsylvania. And then I don't really want to waste too much time on these New England races. They're going to pretty much go one way or the other. So I'm going to start off with the two flips for Democrats. These are going to be Maryland and Massachusetts. And Maryland Democrats are up by 27% on average, as Larry Hogan is no longer running for re-election. Moore is going to be the next governor. That is Wes Moore. He's up by 27 points against Daniel Cox. This election is really not going to be too competitive at all. Democrats are going to take back the governorship in Maryland, and they're going to do the same thing in Massachusetts, where Charlie Baker is not running for re-election, and here, Mara Healey is up by 26%. So there's really nothing too much to talk about in these races. They're going to revert back to Democratic control after 8 years of being under the GOP. However, we do have closer races in both New York and Maine. Currently, Kathy Hochul is doing terribly against Lee Zeldin in the Empire State. She's only up by now a single-digit margin. I mean, this is absolutely abysmal for the Democratic Party. She really should be doing a whole ton better right now, even though she is running in a year that's not that great for Democrats. A 9.6% margin is minuscule. Chuck Schumer is ahead by over 20 points in the Senate race, so New York right now is only going to be a likely Democratic state according to the latest polls, as Lee D zone continues to close in on Hochul, but in the end, Hochul is still going to win. And then in Maine, Janet Mills leads by 9.3% against Paul LePage. Yes, LePage is a former governor, but if you look at his election victories, there were races with 3 or 4 candidates, and in his first election, Paul LePage only won 37% of the vote, so there's really not that strong of a candidate, and Paul LePage is currently expected to lose, as Janet Mills will win a second term in office. And then in Vermont and New Hampshire, these races are going to be solid red. Phil Scott is currently up by 38 points against Brenda Siegel in the state of Vermont. And then in the Granite state of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu leads against Tom Sherman by 16 points. These governors are elected every 2 years. And so in 2020, both of them won re-election by a very solid margin. And now they're both going to win their 4th terms in office. And then in the states of Connecticut and Rhode Island, these races are going to go to Democrats. Ned Lamont, the incumbent, is running for re-election in Connecticut, and he's up by 11 points against Bob Stefanowski. He won a very close race against him in 2018, just 3 points, but this year, as the incumbent, Lamont is going to do better, so the state of Connecticut is going to be a likely Democratic state this time around. And then in Rhode Island, Dan McKee, who barely survived his primary, is now on track to winning by a solid margin against Ashley Callis. According to the latest polling average, 15.3% is the margin for the Democratic Party there, and so the state of Rhode Island is going to be solid blue. And now we're left with just the races in the Deep South. So Kay Ivey is going to win re-election in Alabama, as well as Bill Lee in Tennessee. We don't have polls for these elections, but these races are going to be very solid for the GOP. However, we do have data in Arkansas, where Sarah Huckabee Sanders right now is expected to win by a solid margin against her Democratic opponent, that being Chris Jones. She has an over 99% chance at winning her first full term. Her father was a former governor of Arkansas, and so after 2 terms for Asa Hutchinson, he will be retiring and make the way for Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the longest-serving press secretary under Donald Trump, to succeed him. In Georgia, Brian Kemp is currently on track to winning his re-election pretty easily. This race was very close in 2018, with Stacey Abrams getting within 1.5 percentage points of defeating the Republican. This was before Democrats won Georgia in presidential and Senate races in 2020 and 2021. But at this point in 2022, Brian Kemp is going to win re-election. The Senate race may be close between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker, but the governor election is not going to be nearly as competitive, as Brian Kemp right now is really doing very, very well, with Stacey Abrams having relatively no chance at winning. So Georgia is going to be a likely Republican state, and so is South Carolina, where Henry McMaster, who became governor after Nikki Haley resigned in 2017, won re-election in 2018, and now he's going to win re-election a second time against Joe Cunningham. Cunningham is running a pretty strong campaign, but still, this is South Carolina. The Senate race is going to be solid red, but the governor election, I think, is going to be significantly closer, but in the end, McMaster is still going to win as the incumbent Republican governor, and so South Carolina, just like Georgia, is going to be a likely Republican state. And finally, in Florida, it doesn't look like Democrats are going to win here either, as Ron DeSantis is up by 7.3% of the polls right now against Charlie Crist. Hurricane Ian is not going to help Crist or the Democrats at all. The incident is going to make it so that Republicans do even better, as the rally around the leader effect does actually happen after horrible things happen. That's what happened after Katrina, and also what happened after, of course, most famously, the 9/11 attacks. George W. Bush became the most popular president at one point in their presidency in American history. And DeSantis right now up 7.3%. We've seen relatively no polling for this race, of course, because of the hurricane. We're probably not going to see too much over the next few months either, but Ron DeSantis, the incumbent, is definitely going to win. If he wants to run in 2024, he is going to have to win this race first, and currently it looks like he's going to do much better than he did in 2018, where he only defeated Andrew Gillum by a margin of 0.4%. And so this is the 2022 governor's map based on the latest polls, updated as of 19 days before the midterms on the 8th of November. And so looking at many of these races, we definitely have close elections in Wisconsin, Kansas, Arizona, Nevada, and then Oregon and Oklahoma at this point either, apparently, as Oklahoma is trending more and more to the left and Oregon to the right, at least for this year's governor races. But definitely the governor elections are going to be very exciting to watch. We definitely have many races to keep a close eye on. And so right now, according to the polls, this is what the map looks like: 22 governorships for the Democrats, 28 for the Republicans, which means that neither party would gain governors, as of course Democrats lost the governorship in Virginia in 2021. And considering that Joe Biden is currently in office, a net loss of 0 for Democrats would be pretty good, as they honestly should be losing governors considering the fact that the national environment does favor Republicans significantly more than it did back in 2018. And so that will be it for this video. Make sure you like it down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which party you think will win more governorships and who do you think will win in the 4 most competitive races. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and I'll see you guys in the next video.